Today, he's talking about the psychology of swimming. And, you know, as an athlete, Brett had incredible mindset, and that's what he's talking about, mind over the body in racing. And I'll never forget this so many times before a race. He was quite intense. You know, the key thing is to keep everyone relaxed and all that sort of thing. Brett would want to come out like it's a fight. And I'll never forget one event we were at, and it was a World Championships, and Brett come out before the race, and he starts pointing at my chest really hard, and he's going, "I am the fastest swimmer in the world, Popey. Nobody's going to beat me." There's Pop-Off and all these great names. And he's ranked about number 20. He comes out and he had the towel around his head, and he's all fired up. And he's going, number one, mate, number one. Oh, I'm going to show you. Number 20. Anyway, he gets out behind the block, and he's still got this little finger up, number one. And but he had this amazing mindset. And this is the great thing about great athletes. He had this amazing mindset, total belief that no one could beat him. And never forget that particular race, he got up, fastest qualifier, and went 22-1. And number one. Yeah, he was right, because he had this incredible mindset. And that's what Brett's going to share today, about the mindset of champions and how do you get the best out of yourself mentally. So please make welcome Mr. Brett Hawke.
Popey, good man, very good man. Had the pleasure of moving squads after the 2003 World Championships. I was looking for something fresh, and wanted to make the Olympic team real bad in 2004, and went searching for a coach, and Popey was the man. Moved down with him and gained so much knowledge. But basically, I gained so much confidence from him, and that's a lot of what I want to talk about today. Is the mental side of swimming. Popey said I was at practice early every day, and I had to be, because I used to race asctaCONVENTION over there, and he was better than me, so I had to figure out a way to work through that. But I've had some great athletes over the last 10 years, and if I know what's the word of that, if I knew then what I know now, I think I may have won that World Championship, but at the time I believed I would. But the psychology is huge, and I think that we've seen this even at the last Olympics, where some of the favorites didn't necessarily win the gold medals, and we see that a lot. And what I find is the physiology and the training and the day-to-day work is very important, but you can lose that in an instant under pressure and at the competition. So the stuff that I'm sharing today is based on my knowledge and experience. I swam for the Australian team from 2000 to 2006, so I was around some of the best athletes in the world. And then I've gone on to coach. The way I fell into coaching was I was at Auburn University as a swimmer in the late 90s. Didn't finish my degree, and then when I finished swimming in 2006, David Marsh kind of invited me back to finish my degree. And so I was real happy about that. So I started my degree at right after the Commonwealth Games in 2006. And I'd been there about a month, starting full-time study. And one of the coaches actually got cancer, one of the assistant coaches. So David asked me to fill in for the summer. And he kind of gave me the D team, just deal with all the kids that he didn't want to deal with. And I kind of connected with them for some reason. And they swam really well. And so David kind of asked me to continue coaching with the team full-time. And so then I put my full-time studies to part-time. Didn't finish my degree until 2010. We had twins, me and my wife, in 2008, right before the 2008 Olympics. I already had 2 children. And then the head coach at the time, Richard Quick, passed away in 2009. So I was telling Gary this morning, in 2009 to 2010, I had 4 children. I was now the head coach of the Auburn University swim team, and I was studying part-time as well. So when these kids come to me now and tell me they don't have any time to do certain things, I just laugh at them because that was the worst year of my life, dealing with that. But again, I'll take you through some of this, I hope. Where do I point this thing? I'll do that. So a lot of the time there's this fine line with the athletes between can and can't, and we see this, and I think it starts in practice a lot, where you'll see little situations where the athletes, we challenge them physically, and a lot of the time they'll think that they can't do something or they can do something. And I think that spills over. I think those little things eventually build and they spill over into competition where the confidence is either built or it's not, and sometimes it's on rocky ground. They feel like the confidence is there, but it's actually on rocky ground, and when they get to a situation where they're under pressure, it really shows through. And so how do we build that confidence so it's on solid ground? And that's a lot of what I want to talk about today. I've had some amazing athletes that I've learnt from, and I'll share those with you. These are some of the athletes that I've had in the last 10 years. I guess the best one was Cesar. He's still the current world record holder in the 50 and 100 freestyle. Had the pleasure of coaching him during that period. At the same time, I had Fred Bousquet, who was a French Olympian. I don't know, has this been videotaped right? I don't know if I want to claim that target. I'll give that one to Popey. He can have that. Good kid, but a lot of work. Mark Gangloff and Gideon Lowe and Ariana Vanderpool Wallace. I went to the Olympics with the Bahamas in 2012 with her. There was a team of 28 athletes. 27 of them were track athletes and one swimmer. So I was the head coach. Felt really good about that. And then Tyler McGill, he's an assistant with me now. He swam with me for many years. And I'll tell a little story about him in a minute. And now my current athletes that I have who swam at the last Olympics, Marcelo and Bruno, are two of the world's best. Bruno in the 50 freestyle and Marcelo in the 100 both made the final at the Olympics last year. So there's some of my Olympic finalists and medalists that I've coached, and I've learned a lot from them. I know a lot of people in the room today are age group coaches. I've never coached anybody under 18. So my experiences are based on that. So I hope that you can take some things from this presentation and apply it to what you guys are doing today. But I certainly don't want to pretend I know what you're doing and how you're doing it. But I think a lot of this is applicable to any athletes, and especially as they go up in the ranks as well. I like this quote here. You can't think and hit at the same time. And I think we see this a lot again, where the athletes overthink certain situations. And we try and, I've seen coaches give an athlete a lot of information right before a race, and they're overthinking that situation where they should be in a position where they're just completely relaxed. And I think I found as an athlete, I was able to apply what I learned as an athlete and give that to my students. A lot from Popey, where even though I was fired up in that situation that he talked about, I didn't get my best performance because I was thinking about being the #1 athlete in the world, or thinking about how much money I was going to make, or what newspaper I was going to be in, things like that. I think we see that in Australia, and it's probably one of the criticisms I have of the athletes here. They're so famous, and I think everybody's chasing that fame and the money, and that can really get in the way. That can hinder, and there are many other things that hinder performance, but it's little things, and I think that sometimes we can certainly overcoach the athlete. I think there's a situation in practice where we can give them a lot of information, but in competition, I think we need to pull back and let the athletes go into kind of an automatic mode. And that's a process that they'll learn over time. But certainly, I think some of my best performances are the ones that I can't remember because I wasn't thinking at the time. And you swim these races, and somebody gets out and they're like, "How'd you do that?" And I don't know. And you guys see that, you feel that when you're driving sometimes. When you learn to drive, it was so nerve-wracking, wasn't it? When you're behind the wheel for the first time, especially if you learn on a stick shift, and you've got to put your foot on the clutch, and you've got to move the stick, and you've got to watch out for people on the road, and these days it's cell phones and people texting while they're driving. But then you get to a situation where you learn how to drive, and all that information is now part of your experience. And I've had situations where I've go into practice, and I'll end up at practice, and I can't remember how I got there. You know, and I'm sure you guys have had that same scenario where you're driving for 20 minutes, and all of a sudden you think, what just happened? How did I get to this point? I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but I have that a lot. And it's just your experiences where you kind of turn your brain off and go into automatic. And I think we need to do that with our competition as well. Where I think the best I've ever experienced in seeing that is Anthony Irvin. Anthony won the Olympics in 2000, and then ended up winning the 50 freestyle in last year in 2016. And he has a remarkable ability to just turn his brain off and let his body go into automatic. And you can see that. You can see it in body language a lot. When an athlete walks to the block, you can tell whether they're overthinking or they're completely relaxed, and you can see whether they're going to have a great performance or a horrible one. And I was talking to Richard Scarce yesterday about that, and Cameron a little bit. And Cameron's a very intelligent kid, and he feels like the mistake that they made was kind of overthinking the race a little bit. So it's certainly something that happens quite frequently. And how do we stop that from happening when we know it may happen? You know, MMA is really big in the US right now, and one of the top guys in the world is Conor McGregor, and I love watching him. You know, one of the things I do is I watch athletes and from all sports, and I watch the best. My wife always tells me that I'm only interested in a sport when there's a championship on the line. I like watching the athletes perform. I like kind of listening to them pre-game and post-game. I love listening to coaches as well and their analysis of how the championship went or that day. Right now they have the NBA Finals going on, and you listen to certain coaches talk about what's happening with their team, and I think it's really interesting. But I really like this quote from Conor, and it says, at the end of the day, you've got to feel some way, so why not feel unbeatable? And I know at times in my career I definitely felt that, and I think that was important. And so what I try and do with my athletes now is get them to feel the same way. And a lot of that starts in practice. But certainly it needs to spill over into competition. When they compete, they need to see themselves as the best in the world. And I think that's really important. Okay, so it all comes down to self-confidence. And how do we build self-confidence? And there's three main ways that I'd like to talk about today, and that's kind of the athlete-coach relationship. I think it's vital. It's certainly something that I got from Popey and was able to then apply that and make the Olympic final because of my relationship with Popey and the belief that he put in me. So that's one of the things that I think that I've done really well with my athletes is have a relationship with them and really understand them. What are the performance contributors? What are the things that we can do that can aid in that performance? And then what are the things that detract from that performance? And then training to perform. I think the training at the end of the day is going to set them up to really perform at their best. So I talked about Ariana at the Olympics. She actually made the Olympic final in the 50 freestyle in 2012. When she came to the Auburn program, she wasn't a highly recruited athlete. She's 5'5". She's a tiny little girl, and she wasn't very good at the time. There weren't a lot of schools recruiting her. She was kind of middle of the road. But she came to our program, and immediately I saw something in her that other people didn't have, and it was this killer instinct. You know, she wanted to be the best, and she wanted to beat girls that were bigger and stronger and faster than her. And so this is where the athlete-coach relationship came in, is I started to believe in her as much as she believed in herself, which then gave her the confidence she needed to grow and get faster as an athlete as well. In the 4 years that she went through Auburn, she went from not qualifying for NCAA's her first year to being the fastest swimmer in NCAA history, being the first woman to break 40 seconds in the 100-yard freestyle. And I think just blew the minds of a lot of people, the way she did it and how she did it. And what she became was just an intimidating force. And this is actually something that Cesar used to do. Naturally, he would put water in his mouth and spit it out to kind of intimidate his opponents. And Ariana kind of caught on to that and picked it up and started to do that herself. And women didn't do that, or don't do that at the time. It's very much a masculine thing to kind of try and intimidate your opponents. But she was tough, and I learned a lot from her. And she retired last year at the 2016 Olympics, and she's got the itch again, and she's coming back again. So I guess that's what we do in swimming. We just it's in our blood. We can't let it go, right? Tough girl. So I think the athlete-coach relationship here is one of the most important things. Developing that working relationship with your swimmers. The first thing that I needed to do when I came in as a coach, and I told you I worked with kind of that D team, is kind of demonstrate my knowledge. At first it was like, who are you? What do you know? You've never coached before, all that kind of thing. And so I had to come in and demonstrate that I knew what I was talking about immediately. I had to demonstrate the credibility of being a coach. When I first started coaching, I didn't know how to use a stopwatch, and so I kind of had to fake it a little bit. I would, the watch wouldn't stop at times, and I would tell them times, and they would see through that pretty quickly. So I figured out I better learn how to use this watch, or I'm not going to get very far in this game. So I knew that was one of the things that I had to learn and master really quick, just the competence of being a good coach and selling that to them, which then gave them the confidence that this guy really knows what he's doing. I'm going to start to trust him. I'll put my trust in him and see where it goes. So the trust is important. I was lucky enough to coach with a guy named Richard Quick, who was Stanford head coach for many years. I'm sure a lot of you may have seen his DVDs. Just a high energy, intelligent coach, and I was lucky to coach with him for 18 months. After about 6 months, he pulled me aside and said, I'm going to take you under my wing. I'm going to teach you everything. I'm going to have you in every meeting that I have with an athlete or a parent or administrator. So again, I was very fortunate to have great coaches and great mentors right before Richard got cancer as well and passed away. But I learned a lot from him, and he was one of those coaches that put belief in his athletes, and he had this fantastic ability to see the future. And I don't know whether he actually could see the future or it's something that he just believed he could, but he would say things that we don't say as coaches. The world record still stands with Cesar at 46.9 and 20.9. And I think a part of that is our fault, that we're not talking or seeing beyond that. I hear a lot of coaches and athletes talk about swimming 47 seconds in the 100 freestyle, or possibly swimming 46, but there's no one talking about swimming 45. And that was kind of where Richard was. Richard would go above and beyond. He would look 10 years in the future and say, well, in 10 years from now, this is what's going to happen, because history tells us if we look 10 years back, people weren't swimming this fast 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Now, I think the suits changed that situation a little bit, but certainly at the NCAA level, we had the suits for short course yards, and most of those records are being broken now. And a lot of that has to do with the competitiveness of the NCAA swimming. We're seeing that a lot more at long course right now, where some of those records are broken. But I'm certainly, I see myself as a sprint coach, and I want to break these world records. And so I think we need to look beyond. And you guys can do this with your kids, I'm sure, where a kid, we don't put limits on them. We tell them like anything's possible. Why not think 10 years ahead? Why not think further ahead than anybody else is thinking? And so this is something that I've tried to instill in my coaching as well, is kind of open up the limitations and open up the possibilities for my athletes and get them to believe truly that anything is possible. And breaking down those barriers in practice, I think, is key. Challenging the athletes in practice to do things that they've never done in practice before. Writing workouts or creating situations where we're really challenging the athlete in a physical sense, which then challenges them in a mental sense. You know, there are many times where I write a workout and the athletes look at it and they're like, "You're crazy, like, we can't do that." And I'm sure you've experienced the same thing where they're like, "There's no way I can do that today." And then they do it and they think to themselves, "Oh, well, that wasn't so bad. Like, I actually got through that pretty well." Then they'll come back the next day and say the same thing. "I can't do that today," you know? And so you got to restart and you got to go again. So I think it's a continual process of challenging them, and then when you have your meetings with them, open up the possibilities of what they could possibly do. That's certainly going to build the self-confidence in the athlete. I find that when I believe as a coach, then the more I believe, the more they start to believe. You know, at first they're going to think you're crazy, but then the more you talk about it, the more you repeat it, the more you give them situations in practice where they do things that they've never done before, then all of a sudden they start to believe, well, maybe he's right. Maybe I can swim beyond what everybody else is doing and what everybody else is saying. And we see this all the time. I certainly saw this year at the NCAAs where Caleb Dressel, I'm not sure, he may not be a name that any of you have heard. He was on the US relay that won the gold medal last year. He was just a player on that relay. He was just one of 4 guys. But he's going to be a guy that will break these world records. He's doing things that I've never seen before. And at the NCAAs, he swam 40.00 in the 100 freestyle short course yards, and it was one of the most phenomenal swims I've ever seen. And I would never have thought, this is me sitting up here telling you to open your possibilities of thought, and I never would have thought that somebody could swim that fast. So now we have to start thinking 39 seconds. And so it's the same thing. Whatever the race is, whatever the athlete that you're dealing with, move the bar and challenge them in that respect. I try and get under the skin of my athletes in certain situations, many different ways. I think you then find what really motivates them and what really pushes them. Some kids work off an internal, like Ariana. She wanted to beat girls that were bigger and stronger than her. Other kids work off an external, like, I want to make this much money, or I want to be on television, or whatever it is externally, or somebody said something about me. I know I worked off that a lot. I would hear somebody doubt me or somebody say something negative about me, and I was like, I'm going to prove that person wrong. And so whatever it is, internal or external, find out what gets under their skin and try and rub that into them every now and then. Try and get that out of them every now and then. I'm sure you've seen this in your athletes as well. So what are the things that we can do to aid in the performance? For me, positive self-talk is a key. I'll tell you a little story about Cesar at the Olympics in 2008. He was a young kid, 21 years old, never been to the Olympics before, and I think once he got there, we talked about what you'll see and what you'll experience and what you'll feel many times, and I think you guys have seen this. You talk about a competition, but it's not until they get there where you see them tighten up. Like, it's real all of a sudden. You're at the Olympic Games, you've got the TV, you've got your competitors walking around. For me, I remember when I got to the Olympics for the first time, it was the first time in my career that all the best swimmers in the world were in one room. I remember walking into the ready room like this. They had chairs out, and like Popey said, Alex Popov was there, Peter Van den Hoogenband was there, Ashley Callis was there. Everybody, all the fastest swimmers in the world were in one room. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, yeah, wow, I've never done this before. I've never experienced this before. Normally you think to yourself, well, I can beat that guy and I can beat that guy and that one. But all of a sudden, you've got a room full of people that are all good. And you have to try and beat them all. And for me, that experience was overwhelming. And I know that Cesar, when we went to the 2008 Olympics, it was a very similar situation because he was just a young kid who'd never been there. And so the negative self-talk started. And I remember telling him that I wanted him to try and say some positive words. And he kept saying, well, I feel terrible in the water. I don't feel good. This is going to be bad. I suck. All the negative words were coming through. And I couldn't take it anymore. I'm like, just stop. Like, whatever negative thought comes in your mind right now, turn that word into the opposite, opposing word, whatever it is, and change it into a positive. And it's like, I can't do that. I can't do that. And so I gave him an exercise. I said, well, just do this for me. In warm-up today, what I want you to do is I want you to come up with one word, a positive word. It could be strength. It could be power, something that elicits some sort of emotion in you that makes you feel strong, that makes you feel good, rather than I feel terrible, I feel like crap. So just come up with one word, and what I want you to do for the first 400 is I want you to stop at the end of the pool every lap. I want you to just bob up and down in the water 10 times, and I want you to say that word over again. So if it's powerful, I want you to swim a 50, and I want you to bob up and down. I want you to say powerful, powerful, powerful 10 times. And then I want you to come back and I want you to say the same thing. So I said, just do that for me. And then I'll put up with the rest of the garbage that you're going to sell me for the next couple of hours. But just give me a 400 where you do that. Can you do that? And he said, yes. So he did that. And he said, I felt better for sure. I felt pretty good. But, once he got out of that comfortable environment again he was then faced with, he's at the Olympics and these are all my competitions, so it slowly went back to negative. And so the positive self-talk for me is important, and the best athletes are the ones in the best situations have told themselves over again that good things are going to happen, they feel good. Visualization, imagery are something that I think are important. We have swimming and diving in America. And a lot of the times what I'll see the divers do is in the approach to their performance, a lot of the times you'll see them and they'll be making hand movements and gestures, and they'll kind of be going through this visualization imagery through the movements that they want to make right before they want to make them. And then they go out, they relax, they clear their mind, and they hit the dive exactly the way they've kind of performed it in their mind right before they did it. And so I learn a lot from the divers, and I try and get my athletes to do that, is think in the warm-up how they want it to look, how they want it to feel, and then once they kind of walk to the blocks, turn that off and let it go into automatic, because they've set that pattern up in their mind. And I think that's really important. Staying focused on tasks and not, the people around you. I get this a lot in practice, and I'm sure you guys have experienced this, where some of the best athletes will focus on what the people next door are doing to them, and getting beaten in a repeat, or this person's continually beating me, and it'll start to wear them down and beat them down. And the performance in practice will take a hit because they're focused on the person next to them. And then, again, if they do that continually, that translates into racing as well. They'll start to focus on the people that are next to them, the people that are around them. One of the things I do now as a coach is I kind of take the heat sheet. My parents are up the back. I'm lucky enough to have a little bit of time with them. But I remember when I first started swimming, my dad would get the heat sheet, and he would highlight, all the kids that were better than me. And I remember, because they're all the kids that I had to beat, right? But when I was young, that was overwhelming for me. It was like, I know this kid's good. I know this kid's better than me. And so it was kind of the same situation where I had 20 kids that were better than me, and I had to try and beat these. And so the heat sheet for me was overwhelming as a young kid. people run to get that heat sheet. Like, oh, where are you? What lane are you in? What position are you in? What are you ranked? And for me, it's all crap. Like, it doesn't mean anything. It's something that happened in the past. If there's a time on a heat sheet, that happened in the past. It's not going to happen today. They have to prove to me that they're better than me today. And so what I do with my athletes a lot is I take the heat sheet and I just rip it up and I throw it. And I say, listen, if you want to know what lane you're in, I'll tell you what lane you're in later. But it doesn't mean anything right now. Who are you next to? It doesn't matter anything right now. What time they came in with, it means nothing. It's something they did in the past. And just rip that heat sheet up because they pore over it like it's the Bible, like it means so much and it means absolutely nothing. So a lot of the times, it's the same situation where the training partners are doing certain things. Just tell them to forget that. And then kind of accepting and releasing control of certain situations. I was told a story from Gary about Kate Campbell, I guess, at the Olympics last year. Didn't perform as well as we kind of all expected. And what are the reasons behind that? And Gary was telling me that she came out in the newspapers, I guess, and said something about receiving a text message from one of her sponsors saying that they're having a big party and they can't wait till she wins the gold medal and they're going to celebrate the gold. That ended up putting a lot of pressure on her. And I've experienced this as well, certain situations where there are so many expectations on athletes put on by many different people that you try and peel those away and get them to kind of accept and release control of those situations, that you can't control what other people think, including your parents, your friends, your coaches, other coaches, the media. Just releasing control of those situations. And that's really tough to do. It's difficult, but I've got a story in a second that I'll tell you about where I had an experience where I was able to get an athlete to do that and get the performance out of them. But I get my athletes to write certain things up as well. One of my athletes wrote this on a chalkboard that is in her house, and I tell her all the time, you're powerful beyond measure. You don't know how powerful you are. You don't know how good you can be. But if she says that to herself every day, eventually she'll start to believe that. So I think things like that help in the performance that you want to get later down the road. I was lucky enough to be at the 2004 Olympics and have time with a lot of great athletes and be around them and learn from them. And Ian was certainly one of those athletes that I spent some time with and just got to watch. And I think that's where my coaching career started, was watching other athletes around me and having those experiences. And Ian was just the best of the best at the time. And there was an enormous amount of pressure on him into this 200 freestyle because you had Peter Van den Hoogenband, you had Hackey, you had Michael Phelps, who was swimming really well. Finally, I think the first Olympics he competed at was Sydney, and I think he finished fourth in the 200 butterfly at age 15. Well, now I think he was 19 at this Olympics, and this was his kind of coming out party. So there was a lot of pressure and expectation on this 200 freestyle. There was a lot of build-up. They called it the race of the century. Imagine the pressure that puts on a person where the media is calling the race that you're swimming in the race of the century. I can't imagine the pressure that would go with that. But I know that I wanted to watch how Ian responded to it. I wanted to learn. I wanted to see what he was doing because it was before my 50 freestyle. And I thought to myself, well, if I can watch him, maybe I can apply some of this to what I'm doing. And we had a situation. It was about 20 minutes before the race, and Ian pulled in a couple of his close buddies, and somehow I made that circle, which was pretty good. But he pulled in some people, and he seemed really relaxed. We sat down, and he just went around the circle, and he's like, listen, I want all of you to give me an animal that you think that represents strength and power. Just tell me an animal. And so we went around the circle. I thought it was really interesting. I hadn't heard that before. And so we went around the circle, and everybody had their animal that said that represented that to them. And I wasn't that clever. I couldn't think of anything. So I thought my last name was Hawke, so I'll go with a hawk. And it was kind of unusual, and he asked me why, and I thought to myself, well, a hawk kind of circles its prey before it swoops down and grabs its food, and it's desperate for that food, and so it circles and circles and looks for the right opportunity and comes down and grabs its food and eats for the day, and maybe feeds its family as well. So for me, that was an animal of strength and power and precision, for sure. And I know that he needed all those things in this race. And I remember watching him. For me, he did something very similar to that, where he sat back the first 50, and then he wasn't in the lead at the 100-meter mark, and people were thinking to themselves, Ian's not going to win this race, Ian's not going to win. At the 150, he kind of coming into the 150 wall, he started to make a move on Peter and Phelps, turned at the 150-meter wall and then just put the gas on and just blew past everybody. And for me, that was remarkable. It was remarkable, first of all, how relaxed he was. And then it was remarkable that he was using that situation to create images in his mind of power and strength. And I learned a lot from that experience, and it's something that I try and use with my athletes now is get them to forget about their surroundings and focus on things that can make you feel powerful beyond measure. A lot of the times when we're under pressure, our bodies will react in a way that we're not really conscious of. We'll tighten up slightly. And what happens when you tighten up slightly in swimming and performance is you tend to overswim the race, or every stroke you take is hard. It's a hard stroke, and you remember every single stroke you took. And at the end of the race, your lactate levels are spiked, you're exhausted, you're fatigued, you think to yourself, oh, well, my coach didn't taper me right, I didn't train hard enough. All these things come through your mind when the reality is you just tightened up and you didn't allow yourself to relax. And I'm sure as swimmers in this room, a lot of you have experienced that. We've had this moment where the race has felt so hard. And if you really look back, and this is something that I look back on my career, I had moments like that where Ian said, I was telling myself I was number one in the world. I went out in the prelims and I put myself in lane 4 of the championship final. And in the championship final, I tightened up without really consciously knowing it and didn't have the performance that I wanted to have. And I look back and I think, wow, if I can find a way to tap into the Ian Thorpe moment, or have my athletes relax at the most pressure time where the performance needs to come out. If I can get them to do that, we're going to really win some races. Because I think that a lot of athletes tend to tighten up in those situations. Okay, so again, these are the things that take away from that performance and impede competitive success. Certainly the fear of failure. I think that can be crippling at times where an athlete really is scared of losing rather than confident of winning. We have situations where we're afraid to lose. Whatever it be, whether it be, a lot of the time it'll be to please our parents or to please a sponsor. You really want to win so badly that it invokes this fear in you. The negative self-talk is something that you see a lot. Athletes will say negative things. I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't beat that person, that person's bigger, stronger than me, that person's faster than me. Have a look at the heat sheet. It tells you they're faster than me, it tells you they're better than me. So this negative self-talk starts a lot. Or in workout, in practice, I can't do that, I can't do this, I'm not good enough, I'm not fast enough, I feel terrible today, I don't have it today. Whatever it is, the excuses start and the negative self-talk starts. And so words for me are very powerful. And so the words that I try and talk with my athletes during practice and during competitions, generally you can, and you will. And you have the ability, and all those sorts of things. So for me, the words are powerful. The words that we use are very powerful and have a huge impact. And then that invokes the imagery, the negative imagery. You know, once you start to tell yourself you can't do something, you start to see yourself not doing something. And so the opposite must be must be correct for me. If you believe you can't do something, then you have to be able to believe you can do something. So I try and reverse it in that aspect. Whenever you have a negative thought, there must be the opposing opposite positive thought to that. So whatever that word is, I ask them for that word. What is that word you're saying to yourself? What are you repeating to yourself right now? What are other people saying about you? Is it true? Is it believable? Do you really think that you can't do this today? Things like that. So try and flip it on them. Overanalyzing is certainly something that's kind of overcoaching or overanalyzing. You'll see an athlete talk about, well, I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to do this. And again, with our divers, they're great examples. When they go up onto that board and they overthink the dive itself, they land flat and it hurts. And a lot of the times we do that in swimming. We land flat and we can't figure out what just happened. Like, why did that hurt so much? Why was that so hard? Why didn't I win when I was clearly the favorite? Overanalyzing is probably the thing that is happening there. And so we have to figure out a way to stop that from happening. And then the distractions, obviously. I'll talk in a second about one of the distractions that I overcame with one of my athletes. But social media is such a big thing these days. Kids have their phones on them constantly. You know, it's just incredible how attached they are to their phones. And the information that is pouring in. For my athletes, you know, there are websites out there that tell you how great a certain athlete is, how bad another athlete is. And then with these stories that they put up, then there's a comment section. And I'm sure you guys have seen these. As a young coach, I used to read the comment section about me and how terrible I was, and I started to believe that. You know, when I first got into coaching and I had Cesar, and I hope I can share this with you open and honestly, when I had Cesar and I'd only been coaching 2 years and he won the Olympic gold medal, I thought I was the greatest coach on earth. I thought, this is the easiest thing I've ever done. Like, I'm just going to keep winning. I'm just going to keep pumping these kids out. And then I went through a period where it didn't happen like that. And people started to tell me through social media and other avenues that I was terrible and I was this and I was that. I started to read these things and I started to believe these things. And I went through a period of kind of a slight depression where I thought I was awful. I couldn't do anything right. I started to doubt myself. I started to doubt all the things I was doing. I started to doubt the practices I was writing. I went, you know, when I first came into coaching, I was like, I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to do it a certain way that nobody else is doing. I'm going to have fun. I'm going to challenge them. I'm going to change up the training. You know, people are doing warm-ups, main sets, warm-downs. So I'm going to flip that on its head. I'm going to do something completely different. We're not going to warm up. We're not going to do main sets. And I certainly don't like cool-downs. They're a waste of time, so we're not going to do those. So I had this idea of doing things completely different, and the swimmers were so engaged with it. And I trusted myself, and I believed myself. And then when I stopped winning the big races and people started to tell me that I was not that good, I started to doubt things. And I started writing practices the way that other people would. Well, maybe I have to do things this way. You know, this coach is getting some results, so maybe I got to follow them, and I got to kind of pull back. And I started to get away from my creativity. I started to doubt myself a lot, and started to have this negative self-talk and this negative imagery as a coach. And now I've gone back into this phase of creativity again and not caring what other people think. So I went from kind of this stage of thinking I knew everything to thinking I knew nothing. So now I think I'm in a situation where I know a lot about nothing. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. Training to perform. And this is something that the Americans do really well, is surrounding yourself with people that are on the same mission as you. And this is important for our program. We can't have success in our program unless everybody's on the same page and everybody's attached to that mission, whatever that mission is. For us, it's to win NCAA championships. For us, it's to perform at the Olympic Games. Those things may be different for you. Whatever your club mission is, whatever your team mission is, you have to surround your best athletes with other athletes that can join into that mission, can start to believe in that mission. And again, this is something that the US guys do really well. I think we saw that at the Olympic Games, where you have a situation where they go to the trials a month before the championship. They're all on separate teams, and they're all out to kill each other. They're all out to beat each other. And you have people from Texas and Michigan and Auburn and California, and they don't like each other, okay? It's a month before the Olympics. They go, they compete, they fight, and then they become the US team. And when they're when they become that US team, all that other stuff gets put aside, and they get on the same mission. They want to be the best team in the world, and they want to crush people at the Olympic Games, and they want to perform for their country, and they want to swim under that flag. And it's incredible the transformation that they make from being fierce competitors to teammates in a very short amount of time. And I think they do this obviously better than anybody else, where they create a situation, and I'm going to talk about this, I think, in a couple of days with the periodization, the peaking in, what is the name of that talk? Double peaking periodization, that's the one. Where you peak for an event and then a month later you got to peak again, and I'll talk about this, but it's certainly a situation where you want to surround yourself with people that are on the same mission. So training to perform. How do we apply this to our training? How am I going for time here? Oof, pushing it, aren't I? All right, I'll start to move through these a little bit quicker. Focus on potential, things that they can do. Try and highlight those things. All right, what can you do really well? Focus on those things, and then eventually move those things to, hey, I think you can do this, and then they'll see that they can do that, and eventually they'll become that, and eventually they'll believe that. Certainly got to build a competitive environment. I want my athletes to be competing with each other in practice, because they're going to get that at the competition, no doubt. So how do you get these kids to compete? I went to Richard's practice last night. There was like a little 12-year-old kid, and Popey was with me, and at the end of the main set, they put in this surprise 400. And I guess this kid's a butterfly, and he said, I want to go 400 butterfly. You know, and this kid just ripped a 400 butterfly. I thought it was the greatest thing ever. And Popey and I gave him a little high five at the end, but that's the kind of situation where this kid wanted to be great and he wanted to compete. And these guys are doing freestyle, and he didn't succumb to that. He's like, I'm doing butterfly, you know. And so they're the kids that you want to try and build a team around. Kids that are hungry, kids that compete in practice. Certainly for us, we want to recruit the best athletes in the world, and you want the best athletes in your program. And so you don't want negative personalities. You don't want detractors. And so I try and look for kids. A lot of times people say, well, how do you recruit a kid? I look for personalities. I look for attitudes, because they're the things that are going to spread within your program. And if someone's got a bad attitude, it's like a cancer. You guys know it. If there's someone bringing in a bad attitude every day, it spreads like cancer. And so if I have that, I either pull that kid out and talk to them and kind of give them the ultimatum of like, hey, you better fix this up, or you're out. You know, I'll push a kid out of my program if they're not. I don't care how good they are. Maybe slightly if they're really good. But you want to bring in attitudes and personalities that are going in create an environment that spreads. We get our kids to do peer coaching as well, where we'll pull back and just say, all right, you teach. You know, we have 22-year-olds in our program. We have 18-year-olds. So we'll say to the 22-year-olds, look, you've gone through the program. I want you to talk to them. I want you to teach today. And so we'll have teaching days where the older kids in our program will relate the information that they've learned to the younger kids in our program. So I highly recommend that. It's a great thing to do. And that builds team as well, and it builds trust within their own team, where you'll have a 17-year-old talk to a 12-year-old in your program, and all of a sudden that 12-year-old knows that 17-year-old's invested in me, they believe in me, they see something in me, they've given me information, and now you create a culture where everybody's together. So I highly recommend that. Breaking down components of the race to build confidence, certainly something that we do in our program. And then focus on the process over the outcome. I was at the Women's NCAA Championships, and I was listening to Greg Meehan in warm-up, the way he was talking to Simone Manuel, and Simone said, I don't feel good today. And he said, forget about the feeling. Focus on the action. Focus on how you're doing it rather than feeling. The feeling's going to come in a few days. When you have to compete in the 100 freestyle, you're going to feel great that day, trust me. But today, forget the feeling and focus on how you're doing things. So certainly the process, and that can be applied to your training as well. What are you doing today rather than worrying about what you're going to do tomorrow? Focus on the moment that you're in. This is something that I think is really important as well, is this compartmentalization, being able to focus on the task at hand rather than all the other things that are happening in your life. You might be having a situation with your boyfriend or girlfriend, and a lot of times they'll bring that into the pool. And what I tell my athletes is, like, leave it at the door. Whatever's happening, if you got bills to pay, if you got a girlfriend that is whatever's happening there in that relationship, if you got parents that are getting divorced, and a lot of times that has impact on my athletes. You have a parent that's lost their job. I know that all that stuff is very difficult. And we have life. Everybody lives life. But I tell my athletes to leave it at the door, and the 2 hours that they're there, they have to be the best athletes they can be. And you'll find that'll spill over into racing as well. They'll find ways to compartmentalize and leave that stuff and focus on the task at hand. And so this is, with my best athletes, I've found that they have had the ability to compartmentalize certain situations. And this is one of those. It's funny, we were staying in this hotel a couple of years ago with the Brazilian team. I was here with them at the Pan Pacific Championships. One of my athletes that I have right now is Bruno Fratis. We had a great preparation. Everything went well. We did all the right things physically. We did all the right things mentally. I felt like we're going to have a great performance. Everything was in place. So I was relaxed. So it's the morning of the 50 freestyle. He swims the 50 freestyle and did exactly the opposite of everything that we trained and everything that I taught him to do and everything that I wanted him to do. It was a complete mess. I was like, what on earth was that? And he took 8 breaths. I don't know if I wrote it in there, but he took 8 breaths, and we trained not to take a breath. For some reason, he took 8. Like, what is happening? And so the pressure of being the best, he wants to be the best so badly. He's one of those kids I have to talk down because he wants it so badly that it's everything to him. So he swims this morning swim, and just it was awful. And he says, my training wasn't good. Every excuse in the book that he could think of, he threw it at me. He had everything. And so I'm like, oh God, this is tragic. This is going to be so bad. And we got on the bus, and someone back in Brazil had written an article, again, the social media. He got straight on the social media to look to see who was saying how terrible he was, because he needed that reinforcement, because he was saying he was terrible to himself, so he wanted everyone else to tell him he was terrible. And there was an article from Brazil where it said, we've lost Cesar Cielo, we've lost our great athlete, and now we're left with Bruno Fratis, and look what we have. And he was devastated. So I said, listen, let me take the phone. Just put this phone away. And again, it was a situation where I said, listen, just give me 4 hours. Forget about everything you felt. Forget about everything you're saying to yourself. Forget about what everyone else is saying about you. Give me 4 hours where we go back to doing things exactly the way I want to do them. And then you can go back to telling yourself how terrible you are if you lose the race, and everyone else can tell you how terrible you are. But right now, just give me 4 hours. So he said he would. I asked him to start fresh and forget everything. Here I wrote 5 hours, so I need a little bit longer with him. I asked him to focus on the things that we had trained to do, the action, rather than the way he was feeling. In the warm-up pool, I broke it down to real simple things, real simple tasks that I knew he could do, that he could perform, and that I could build confidence with. I asked him to do little things that he did really well, and all of a sudden he started to feel better about himself. And then I told him positive things, things that I felt like I told him how great he looked. Every swimmer likes to hear how great they look, right? How ripped they are and how strong they look. He looks pretty good, but he wasn't seeing those things. He wasn't feeling those things. So I had to reinforce all these positive things. And then he gets up, and I asked him to clear his mind. And one of the things I asked him to do was just look straight ahead. Forget about Anthony Irvin. Forget about who's the other kid, the American kid? I don't know. There was a bunch of really fast kids around him. I said, forget about all those kids. What I want you to do is focus right ahead, straight ahead, and just swim as fast as you possibly can. Forget about everything else. And it was the best I've ever seen him look. He went from looking the worst I've ever seen him look to the best I've ever seen him look, and he went 21-4 in the final and won that race going away from everybody. So to drop a full second, from morning to night is just unheard of in the 50. I didn't think he was going to do that. In my wildest assessment, to go from 22-4, I thought at best we're going to be 21-8, and we're going to be fighting for a medal somewhere if we can do that. And he just went away with it. So for me, again, it just reinforced all that. It's not about the physical components necessarily. It's the mental aspect of this is so powerful. If we can tap into that, you can get performances that you've never seen, you've never experienced before. And I am absolutely, completely running out of time. I only got 1 hour. Can't I go 2? No. Okay. So for me, what I try and tell my athletes is performance isn't a hope or a wish or a dream. All right? Performance is a choice. You choose to perform. If you want to swim fast, you will swim fast. If you want to suck, you'll suck. If you want to tell yourself you're terrible, you'll be terrible. If you want to tell yourself you're great, you'll be great. Okay? So I tell my guys it's a choice. And a quick one here was Tyler McGill. Tyler was racing Michael Phelps and Ryan Lochte at the 2012 Olympics. Michael won everything he went in. Ryan won everything else. And for some unknown reason, Ryan wanted to swim the 100 butterfly that year. And Tyler thought, I can't, that's it. He's the best swimmer in the world. He's the second best swimmer in the world. I'm done. I'm not making the US team. So he came to me in warm-up that morning and he said, what do you want me to do this morning for warm-up? I said, what do you want to do? And he's like, I don't know. You tell me what to do. I said, you're telling me that you've been swimming for 15 years and training all this time, and you're getting to the morning of the performance that you want to make the Olympic team for the US, and you're relying on me to give you that information on how to do it? I'm like, you're in trouble if that's the case. I'm like, why don't you walk away right now and do exactly what you've trained to do, exactly what you know how to do. Stop hoping that this will happen. Know that this is going to happen. This is going to happen today. You're going to make the Olympic team. You're going to beat Michael Phelps. You're going to beat Ryan Lochte. And I want you to believe that. And I just sent him away. And the moment he walked up, I could tell he was nervous. The moment he walked away, I could tell he was confident. Because he was on a mission. And it's funny, he's winning this damn race the whole way, and Michael has a way of coming over the top of people and touching them out, but just touched him out. Tyler went 51.2. His best time at the time was 51.8 in the 100 butterfly. Michael just beat him by a few 100ths of a second, and he beat Ryan. And Tyler was the only person to beat either one of those two at the trials. And he gets out and gives his post-race interview, and they say, how'd you do it? And he's emotional, like he's fired up. He's like, I knew I was going to do it. I was like, yeah, right, you did. He's like, I made a choice today. When I woke up this morning, I made a choice, and he just repeated everything I said. I was like, so it was awesome. So you can get them to believe that, but it does take some work. This is something that I experienced with Fred and Cesar at the World Championships. I was coaching them both at the same time, and what I experienced was in the weeks leading up to the event, Fred opened his gaze. Okay, he started to see and feel everything, and for months they were just focused on the training and how well they were doing. Then all of a sudden, Fred started to go this way, and started to lose sight of his goal, and started to every time Cesar beat him, it was a problem. In taper, if he felt terrible, it was a problem. If everything became a problem, he was having issues with his girlfriend, all that stuff. And Cesar focused in on the goal. Everything became obsolete. There was no problems in his life. And at the start of the season, I said, one of you two is going to win the world championship, the other is going to finish second, because you're clearly the best guys in the world. So why don't you guys work together and shake hands, and whatever happens at the end happens, but we work together and we figure out a way to finish first and second. And in the start of the taper, when this started to happen, I knew Cesar was going to win. I knew without a doubt Cesar was going to beat Fred. And Fred, to me, was the best athlete I've ever coached in terms of talent, raw talent and speed. He had that in spades. And I knew Cesar was going to beat him. So let's quickly have a look at the race, if we can. Okay, Fred is in lane 4, qualified fastest, and Cesar is in lane 6. So Fred got beat on the start. I don't know who that was next to him, but he smoked everybody. Fred's got these monkey arms, I'd call them. He's in lane 4, but Cesar's here in lane 6. It doesn't look as pretty, but just powerful and strong. And it came down to hundreds of seconds, and I could have told you weeks before that Cesar was going to beat Fred. And he had a way of sitting on the lane line and rubbing it in his face. But I just knew that was going to happen. So I hope that's helped. I hope you guys can take something away from that. But again, I think the biggest takeaways are the athlete-coach relationship and that belief that you instill in them and the belief that you have in yourself as a coach. I think it's important. So thank you. I appreciate it.